Good afternoon. Happy Thursday. Welcome back to Quarantine Story Time. I'm Charlotte and I'm back with my chair finally. Go a little bit more masterpiece theater, as it were. I hope everyone is having a great day and a great week. Hopefully you guys are getting to tune into some of the amazing funeral honoring John Lewis. Been watching that off and on for most of the day, and just really honored to have a person like that as part of our country, as part of the history of our country. I mean, the work that he did is sad that we had to do it, but there's never going to be perfection in any human society, and to think that we had a man of such great vision and strength is really amazing. I wish that his vision and strength didn't have to be used for such to fight such injustice, but I'm thankful that we had someone like him to do that, and just honored. He's was an incredible man. So yeah, that's really awesome. I mean, he's really awesome. Sad for the loss. Condolences are hard. I'm sorry. But yeah. I think he's the real, what we should all strive to in whatever our ideals of patriotism should be, is to strive to not just worship our country, but to appreciate for what it is and to have the vision to see what it could be. And I think that's really amazing. And that's something that as Americans we have the opportunity to do, to change, to make things better here. And so I hope that we'll just all keep striving for that. Yeah. For him and for so many others like him who fight the good fight, and also just for our country. And that's what it was intended to be, something we could all fight and strive to make better. I mean, there you go. Hey, Mom's here. That's great. So anyways, we're ready to jump back into some more War and Peace. And as you guys recall, we were in Volume 3, Part 2. We're going to do section 21 through 24 today. And we're picking up with Pierre as he is heading down to check out the battle with Napoleon on the road to Moscow by Borodino. I think he's coming in right before the Borodino battle on the 26th. So yeah, welcome to everyone. If you are behind, feel free to check out the War and Peace playlist. And what else is there to say? Yeah, there's all of that there. It's the year 1812. Napoleon, much of the world is at war, at least much of the Western world is at war. Napoleon has invaded Russia, and he is heading towards Moscow down the road. And the Russian army's been sort of all over the place, and by all over the place meaning retreating a lot and not really central command. And our man Pierre, in classic Pierre fashion, has been hawing about what he's going to do. He sees great significance in this steps of Napoleon and in the course of history, and he knows he needs to be part of it. But so far, he's basically just gone as far as having really great ideas and thinking that he should wait them out. But he's made a decision. He's going to join the army, and so he's headed now towards Borodino, and I believe the name of the place was Sharadino. I'm going to mispronounce it, so let me try by trying to do it by memory. Shevardino. So he came in. They had a battle there in Shevardino on the 24th, and then into the 25th. And the 25th, there's kind of fortification as forces move. And we're going into the 26th, and they're going to have the battle in Borodino. We'll pick up with Pierre as he is coming out in that area and see what's going on. All right, so section 21. Pierre stepped out of the carriage and went past the laboring militiamen up the barrow from which, as the doctor had told him, the battlefield could be seen. It was 11 o'clock in the morning. The sun was a little to the left and behind Pierre, and through the clear, rarefied air, shone brightly on the vast panorama that opened out before him like an amphitheater over the rising terrain. Cutting through the upper left of this amphitheater, the Smolensk High Road wound its way through a village with a white church that lay 500 paces from the barrow and below it. This was Borodino. The road passed under the village, across a bridge, and, ascending and descending, wound higher and higher up to the village of Velevu, where Napoleon was now staying, visible some 4 miles away. Beyond Velevu, the road disappeared into a forest that showed yellow on the horizon. In this birch and fir forest, to the right of the road, the distant cross and bell of the Kolotsky monastery shone in the sun. All over this blue distance to the right and left of the forest and the road, in various places one could see smoking campfires and indefinite masses of troops, ours and the enemy's. To the right, along the courses of the Kalasha and Moskova rivers, the terrain was all hills and gullies. Between their gullies, in the distance, the villages of Bezubovo and Zakharino could be seen. To the left, the terrain was more level. There were grain fields, and one smoking, burned-down village could be seen, Semyonovsko. Everything Pierre saw to the right and left was so indefinite that neither the left nor the right of the field fully satisfied his notions. Everywhere there were fields, clearings, troops, woods, smoking campfires, villages, barrows, streams, but not the battlefield he had expected to see. And much as he tried to make it out on this living terrain, he could not find a position and could not even distinguish our troops from the enemy's. I must ask someone who knows, he thought, and turned to an officer who was looking with curiosity at his enormous non-military figure. Allow me to ask, Pierre addressed the officer, what village is that in front of us? Borodino or something, said the officer, turning to his comrade with the question. Borodino, the other replied, correcting him. The officer, clearly pleased at the chance to talk, moved closer to Pierre. And those are ours there? Pierre asked. Yes, and those further away are the French, said the officer. Out there you can see them. Those are ours? Asked Pierre. You can see them with your naked eye. There, the officer pointed to some smoke visible to the left across the river. And that stern and serious expression appeared on his face, which Pierre had seen on many of the faces he had met. Ah, they're the French, and there, Pierre pointed to a barrow on the left, near which troops could be seen. They're ours. Ah, ours, and there, Pierre pointed to another distant barrow with a big tree near a village visible in a gully, where campfires were also smoking, and something showed black. That's him again, said the officer. This was the Shevardino redoubt. Yesterday it was ours, now it's his. So what is our position? Position? Said the officer with a smile of pleasure. That I can tell you clearly because I built nearly all our fortifications. There, you see, is our center in Borodino, just there. He pointed to the village with the white church straight ahead. There's the crossing over the Kalosha, and over there, see where rows of cut hay are still laying in a hollow? The bridge is right there. This is our center. Our right flank is over there. He pointed sharply to the right, far into the gully. The Moskova river's there, and there we built 3 redoubts, very strong ones. The left flank, here the officer paused. You see, it's hard to explain it to you. Yesterday our left flank was there in Shevardino, see where the oak tree is? But now I've moved the left wing back. Now it's down there. There, see the village in the smoke? And that's Semyonovsko. Yes, it's there. He pointed to the Revsky barrow. Only it's unlikely the battle will be there. He shifted troops there. But it's a trick. He will probably go around to the right of the Moskova. Well, but wherever it is, we'll have a lot of men missing tomorrow, said the officer. An old sergeant who came up to the officer while he was talking was waiting silently for his superior to finish. But at this point, obviously displeased with the officer's words, he interrupted him. We have to go for Gagans, he said sternly. The officer seemed embarrassed, as if he realized that one might think of how many would be missing the next day, but one ought not to speak of it. Yes, send the 3rd platoon again, he said hastily. And you are what, a doctor? No, I'm just here, answered Pierre, and he went down the hill again, past the militiamen. Ah, curse them, the officer said, who was following Pierre, said, holding his nose and running past the laborers. There they are. They're carrying her. They're coming. There they are. They'll be here in a moment. Voices were suddenly heard, and officers, soldiers, and militiamen went running down the road. A church procession from Borodino was coming up the hill. Ahead of them, all on the dusty road, moved orderly ranks of infantry, their shakos off and their musket pointing down. From behind the infantry came the sound of church singing. Overtaking Pierre, the soldier and the militiamen were running, hatless, to meet the procession. It's our mother they're carrying, our intercessor, the Iverskaya, the Smolenskaya, Mother of God, another corrected. The militiamen, both those who were in the village and those who were working on the battery, dropped their shovels and ran to meet the church procession. Behind the battalion that marched down the dusty road came priests in vestments, and an old man in a cowl, other clergy, and a choir. Behind them, soldiers and officers carried a large, dark-faced icon in a case. This was the icon brought out of Smolensk, which had since been carried around with the army. Behind the icon, around it, in front of it, on all sides, crowds of bareheaded soldiers walked, ran, and bowed to the ground. Having come up the hill, the icon stopped. The people who were holding the icon on towels were replaced. The servers lit the censers, and the prayer service began. The sun's hot rays beat down vertically from above. A faint, fresh breeze played with the hair of the bareheaded and the ribbons that decorated the icon. The singing sounded subdued under the open sky. A huge crowd of bareheaded officers, soldiers, and militiamen surrounded the icon. Behind the priest and the deacon, on a cleared space, stood men of higher rank. One bald general, with a St. George's cross on his neck, stood directly behind the priest's back, and, not crossing himself, obviously a German, waited patiently for the end of the service, which he considered it necessary to hear out, probably to arouse the patriotism of the Russian people. Another general stood in a military pose and kept fluttering his hand in front of his chest, glancing around. Among this high-ranking circle, Pierre, who was standing in the crowd of the muzhiks, recognized some acquaintances, but he was not looking at them. His whole attention was absorbed by the serious expression of the faces in this crowd of soldiers and militiamen, who gazed with uniform eagerness at this icon. As soon as the weary servers, who were singing their 20th prayer service, began lazily and habitually to sing, "Deliver thy servants from affliction, O Mother of God," and the priests and deacons picked up, "For in God we flee unto thee, as a steadfast wall and intercessor," all the faces lit up again with the same expression of awareness of the solemnity of the present moment that he had seen on the faces at the foot of the hill in Muzhaisk, and had glimpsed on many, many faces he had met that morning. Heads were bowed more frequently, hair was tossed, and sighs and the thumping of crosses on breasts was heard. And the thump of crossings on breasts were heard. The crowd surrounded the icon, suddenly parted and pressed against Pierre. Someone, probably a very important person, judging by the haste with which people made way for him, was approaching the icon. It was Kutuzov, going the rounds of the position. On his way back to Tatarivno, he came up to the prayer service. Pierre recognized Kutuzov at once by his peculiar figure, which distinguished him from everyone else. In a long coat on an immensely fat body, with a somewhat rounded back, an uncovered white head, and a blinded white eye and a puffy face, Kutuzov entered the circle in his dipping, swaying gait and stopped behind the priest. He crossed himself with a habitual gesture, touched the ground with his hand, and sighing deeply, bowed his gray head. Behind Kutuzov came Benigsin and the suite. Despite the presence of the commander-in-chief, who drew the attention of all the higher ranks, the militiamen and soldiers, without looking at him, went on praying. When the service was over, Kutuzov went up to the icon, knelt down heavily, bowed to the ground, and for a long time tried and was unable to stand up because of his heaviness and weakness. His gray head twitched with the effort. Finally, he stood up and, with a childishly naive puckering of the lips, kissed the icon and bowed again, touching the ground with his hand. The generals followed his example, then the officers, and after them, crushing each other, stamping, puffing, and jostling with excited faces, came the soldiers and the militiamen. Section 22. Reeling from the crush he was caught in, Pierre glanced about. "Count! Pyotr Kirillovich, what are you doing here?" said someone's voice. Pierre turned to look. Boris Debretskoy, brushing his knees with his hand, he had probably dirtied them venerating the icon, smiling, was approaching Pierre. Boris was elegantly dressed with a hint of the soldier on campaign. He was wearing a long tunic and a whip over his shoulder, just like Kutuzov. Kutuzov, meanwhile, went to the village and sat down in the shade of the nearest house, on a bench with which one Cossack ran to fetch and another quickly covered with a rug. An immense, brilliant suite surrounded the commander-in-chief. The icon started off again, accompanied by the crowd. Pierre stopped some 30 paces from Kutuzov, talking to Boris. Pierre explained his intention of taking part in the battle and looking over the position. "Here's how to do it," said Boris. "Je veux faire les honneurs du camp." You'll see everything best from where Count Benignsen is. I'm attached to him. I'll tell him, and if you want to ride around the position, come with us. We're now going to the left flank, and then we'll come back, and you're welcome to spend the night with me, and we'll end up a game of cards. You know Dmitri Sergeyich? He's here. He's staying here. He pointed to the third house in Gorky. But I'd like to see the right flank. They say it's very strong, said Pierre. I'd like to start from the Moskova River and ride around the whole position. Well, you can do that later, but the main thing is the left flank. Yes, yes, and where is Prince Bolkonsky's regiment? Can you point it out for me? Said Pierre. Andrei Nikolaevich? We'll go past it. I'll take you to him. So what about the left flank? Asked Pierre. To tell you the truth, entre nous, our left flank is in God knows what state, said Boris, lowering his voice confidentially. Count Benignsen proposed something quite different. He proposed fortifying that barrow over there, but not at all like. But, he shrugged his shoulders, his Serenity didn't want to, or somebody talked him out of it. You know, Boris did, and Boris did not finish just because just then, Kesarov, Kutuzov's adjutant, came up to Pierre. Ah, Pesce Sergeyich, said Boris, addressing Kesarov with an easy smile. I'm trying to explain the position to the Count. It's astonishing how his Serenity could guess the intentions of the French so correctly. You mean the left flank, said Kesarov. Yes, yes, precisely. Our left flank is now very, very strong. Though Kutuzov had chased out all the superfluous men of the staff, Boris, after the changes made by Kutuzov, had been able to maintain himself as at headquarters. Boris had attached himself to Count Benignsen. Count Benignsen, like all men on whom Boris had been in attendance, considered the young Prince Tebretskoy an invaluable man. In the army's high command, there were now two clear-cut, well-defined parties, the party of Kutuzov and the party of Benignsen, the chief of staff. Boris belonged to the latter party, and no one knew so well as he how, while rendering servile respect to Kutuzov, to make it felt that the old man was no good and that everything was being conducted by Benignsen. Now, the decisive moment of battle had come, which should either destroy Kutuzov and hand power over to Benignsen, or, even if Kutuzov won the battle, make it felt that it had all been done by Benignsen. In any case, for tomorrow, big rewards should be given out, and new men brought to the fore. And owing to that, Boris is in